Hi, everyone. Welcome to my last day hosting Art School Live this week. It's been such a wonderful week. I am so glad that I get to do this. Eric has been traveling in New York, and this is it for me. So thank you so much for sticking with me this week. I'm very excited for today's guest. We have Craig Stephens. He is a gouache artist that I recently discovered on Instagram and started taking one of his courses that he offers, his introduction to gouache. So super excited to have him here with us today. So let's welcome Craig. Hi, Craig. How are you?
Fine. Thank you, Carrie. Happy to be here.
So glad that you're here. And it's kind of, I had a guest on earlier this week that I had been watching on Instagram. And it's kind of like a surreal moment to go from watching you on Instagram to now I'm here with you live talking to you. So it's really fun. Where are you calling in from? I forget.
I am in Auburn, California, which is a small foothill town that is, easiest way to describe it, is about halfway between Sacramento and Lake Tahoe.
Okay, very cool. So, that seems like it should be a nice area.
Yeah, it's really nice. I live out in the woods. It's tough to even see another house from where I live, but it's nice. Still conveniently close to town, so that's nice.
There you go. You can't beat that. Craig, what are you going to be sharing with us today?
I'm going to do a small study of a baby food jar that I used to use for mixing paint in for cleaning brushes. So it's got some, it's transparent, but it's got a nice paint patina around the top. And I did manage to save the little golden lid. It's just a nice, simple little transparent object that's really fun to paint.
Very cool. I haven't attempted to paint glass yet, so this will be great. Well, let's go ahead and get this show started, and then we'll let Craig take it away.
It's Art School Live with Eric Rhodes. Now, here's your host, Eric Rhodes.
Kari Stober. Welcome to Art School Live, everyone. I'm your host for today, Kari Stober. I'm the director of virtual events here at Streamline. And Eric is traveling this week. He's finishing up. Hopefully we'll be back soon. But today is my last day hosting Art School Live. It has been so much fun. I get so much joy out of getting to talk with artists about art and just have fun watching people paint. Today, we have with us Craig Stephens. He's a gouache artist that I discovered on Instagram. I didn't discover him. I came across him and took one of his beginner gouache classes. He's a great instructor, and I know you guys are going to love his instruction today. He is going to be painting a baby food jar. So it's always interesting when you try to paint that translucent kind of look. So let's go ahead and Craig take it away.
All right, so I paint on a tabletop. This is flat on top of my table. I don't typically use an easel because I like to paint small. I like to move through subjects quickly. I'm an art teacher. I have a high school art teacher. I've been teaching for about 30 years now. And I encourage my students to do things that are convenient for them and easy to paint. So this is an easy setup. I have my wet palette here. This is 140-pound cold press, just regular house painter's tape to tape it down. When you tape it down, you don't have to press super hard because it's going to tear up your paper when you pull it off. I'm going to be using just a mechanical pencil, but any old pencil will do. A couple of brushes, but I'll probably paint just about the whole thing with just a half-inch flat. You can get a wide variety of marks out of a half-inch flat, and I highly recommend it. I like Taklon brushes. Taklon is it's fake fur, right? So you don't have to. No small animals were harmed in making this. I'm using a pretty limited palette. I'll be using, let's see, red, yellow, and blue, but specifically ultramarine blue, flame red, and permanent yellow. And the paint ultimately comes out of a tube, but I like this little box because it's got a silicone seal. I also have on my palette, I also have yellow ochre, which I'll probably do a yellow ochre wash. Here's this is the permanent yellow, flame red, and the ultramarine blue here. So these are the primary colors. They're actually primary, but they're the primaries I'm going to be using with a little bit of yellow ochre. I do have a couple of other reds. I have alizarin crimson and burnt sienna if I need it. And I have a little bit of cobalt blue here and white, of course. And that's going to be off camera. I also have a little spray bottle, which is super, super useful for gouache. I always give it a little spray before I start and a spray when I finish. I've got a jar of water, a nice dry rag, although it's not clean, it's dry. That's good enough for me. And I'm looking at my subject is about probably 5 feet away from me, lit from the side on my little still life stage. And when I start, I have other painter friends who make fun of me that I still do this. But I like to make a couple of axes just to keep things, kind of lined up. It's a super simple still life. There's really no compositional concerns. I'm just presenting this jar to the viewer, right? And it's I've set it up in a way that I don't have to draw any ellipses. I'm setting myself up for success here.
Could you remind me what paper you said that you're using?
It's a 140-pound cold press.
Okay.
And cold press has texture. I found that the heavier weights in paper have more texture. So 300-pound is more textured. But for any given paper, if you flip it over, the side that's facing forward in the pad is what they want you to use. But if you flip it over, you're going to get a less textured paper, and you can paint on either side. I am painting on the more textured side of the cold press. But it's whatever. There's lots of different papers you can use, and I'm kind of a paper junkie. I like to experiment with different papers. It's one of my joys in life is shopping online, for stuff that I need, and then I always save, a few bucks so I can get something I want and try some handmade paper or something. So my initial drawing is it's just a map, and I know I've been drawing for a long time, lots of different subjects, and I know that I have a tendency to put a little bit of a lean in my drawings. Everybody has something or other that they sort of unconsciously do, and that's one of the reasons why I make a vertical axis. It just helps me keep everything straight up and down. And sometimes I'm not shy about using a ruler if I want to make straight lines on the side. But it's a small enough thing that I don't really need to use a ruler to do that. But I always use a ruler for this. I don't know if you can tell on the reference over here. There's a backdrop here, and the light is hitting that backdrop sort of obliquely. And the actual stage that the object is sitting on is getting light very directly. So there's sort of a soft edge that sort of runs across the background here where it sort of transitions in value. And I always use a ruler for that because I hate it when one of these is high and the other one's low,
Yeah.
Might as well line them up. Anyway, that's my lay-in. I don't want to make it super detailed because I'm just going to paint over it. And I'm going to take a 1-inch flat. And this is the only time I'll use this big brush, probably. And I'm just going to take some yellow ochre, and I'm just going to make a nice wash. This does a couple things. One, it gives me something that's not pure white to work on. Although you can work on pure white, it's not a big deal. But this is going to add some nice warmth to the painting. And it's also going to get the paper kind of damp, which will allow it to accept the gouache a little bit more readily than if it's dry. So, and that's all I need. I just need it covered.
And is that, so it looks like that's like a ceramic butcher tray. And do you have like a sponge and some palette paper on there?
Yeah. This is a ceramic butcher tray, and these are magnets. So I can pull one up and show you what's underneath. Good question. I think these are called Swedish sponges. They're basically long-lasting paper towels. That's nice and saturated. You could use regular paper towels too, but you just have to. These last a long time as long as you keep them clean. And I like the metal enamel tray because magnets hold everything down. And my palette paper is 100% cotton marker paper. You want something that's 100% cotton because it's really tough and it'll hold up to lots of mixing and easily last through a session. I think this tray is 11 by 7 inches, And a common size for this kind of paper is 11 by 14. So you can just buy that and cut it in half, and both sides will work. So
Nice.
convenient. But yeah, and there's commercial wet palettes you can get, but I really like this one because it's metal. Usually what I do, and I can kind of mix into the side of my yellow ochre because, well, just because you can. I have limited real estate on my palette, so I like to use, some people spread their palettes way out, but I've learned over the years teaching online classes to sort of manage my palette so everything sort of stays pretty tight, and I actually really like doing that. So I'm going to mix up chromatic black. I just want to get my darkest color. I said I wasn't going to use anything but red, yellow, and blue, but I am going to use burnt sienna for this. It's an earth red, and burnt sienna and ultramarine, if you mix them fairly equally visually, you'll get a nice dark tone that is, I call it chromatic blacks. It looks black. It's made out of colors. And I'm just going to block in the darkest areas on this. And you can see I have some holidays. That's like a commercial sign painter's term for when you have a little bit of a background peeking through. And if I want to get rid of those, I just add a little water so the paint flows off the brush a little bit better. And I just want to get the dark accents kind of established because it's going to give me, some structure to this painting just as I get started. And usually in gouache, I work from wetter consistency to drier consistency. I can even get some of these sort of midtones in by getting a little bit more water and just same color, but just a washier version of it. Works pretty well. And anyone who's tried gouache knows that it has a maddening tendency to dry at a different value than you lay it down at.
I was literally going to just ask you, how do you handle that value shift when it dries?
Yeah, so light colors dry a little darker, and dark colors tend to get a little bit chalky and dry a little bit lighter. And there's a couple ways. One way is I keep everything close on my palette so I can compare color to color while everything is wet. And if the relationships hold up on the palette while everything's wet, then when they dry and shift, they're going to be pretty close.
Okay.
So that's one way. And the other thing is that as later on, when I start using more full-bodied paint on this, it's going to shift less. So paint that's a consistency that's straight out of the tube is going to have less of a color shift.
Oh,
which is
okay.
nice.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
And the other thing is my wife's a math teacher, and I learned this from her. It turns out that there's an actual math, I guess, technique or a method of solving problems called guess and check. And I love that because I can take a stab at it, and if it looks right, but then it dries too dark, I can say, okay, that color that dried too dark is here on my palette, and I need to add white to it. And I can add a little bit of white, and I can paint over it and try again, because this is going to dry really fast. You can see my paper's a little, I don't know if you can tell, but it's a little bit buckled. So my paper's a little damp, but it's still going to dry really fast. So I can take more than one stab at it. So let's start out with getting the sort of gold tones of this cap. So I just took a little bit of permanent yellow, mixing into my yellow ochre and just grabbing some of this neutral stuff I have. And I'm just going to sort of block in some, it's not yellow, but it sort of has that gold metallic tone that I hope I'm going for. And with gouache, another thing I do is I tend to jump around a lot because I need to let some areas dry before I can sort of readdress things and move on. So I'm going to let this lid dry for a little bit. And while that's drying, I'm going to move on to another thing. When you're painting glass, you have to, one of the things that's fun and interesting about glass is there's not a ton of different colors in it, right? I have
Right.
this background tone over here. It's just an old piece of, it's a piece of canvas, unprimed canvas that lines my stage. And so it's, you know, what can I say about that canvas? It's not white. It's warm, it's light, it's a very desaturated color. So I have a lot of latitude when I do something like this. I don't have to stick exactly to the colors I see. I can take some liberties. So what I'm going to do is, instead of think about the actual hue that I'm trying to match, I'm going to think first about value, and then I'm going to think a little bit about color temperature and go from there. Right. So
Okay.
I'm not going to try and match exactly the color I have, because I don't know, that's not fun for me.
Well, and that's something. So I've done a couple of pet portraits, and they're based off of photos. So then I'm trying to fill in the background with something completely different. And so I've learned that it can be challenging to try and fill that background space with a color that's not actually there. If you are not as well versed in color theory and application, it can look very
Right.
flat. So
Right. Well,
so
and weirdly,
very
that's a big stumbling block for a lot of people, myself included. It took a long time for me to get a reasonable strategy for painting backgrounds on these really very simple still life studies that I've just come to really enjoy painting. In this very sort of warm, neutral canvas background that I have is the perfect sort of foil to work against. So I have this object, and I'm mostly painting different versions of the background color because I can see it through the jar, and it's reflecting into it. And the top part of the jar does have a local color because of the, you know, years of paint has sort of stuck to it. And then this sort of metallic gold that's up here has a, you know, an actual color. But for the rest of it, I'm just gonna say, okay, let's go yellow ochre, ultramarine. I'm just going to say I'm going to make kind of a desaturated, warm, almost sort of like maybe acidy green. For what reason? Here's a little bit of, let's throw in a little bit of permanent yellow. No other reason except that I think I just want to give it a try, right?
I love that.
And so this is not the color, right? This is not the color that I'm trying to get. It's the wrong value. Everything's wrong about it. But I'm going to add some white to it. And white does three things with gouache. One of them, the easiest one to guess, is it makes everything lighter, right? So it gives you a lighter color, but it also desaturates the color. Look, it just desaturated the heck out of that color I had.
Yeah.
And I'll just sort of make a little trail down here. So I have a couple of different versions of it. And I know I'm not mixing up enough color to use. I'm going to have to continually sort of mix color and make it work. So I just blew it. I made that way too blue, but that's okay, because I can I'm constantly remixing it. And as long as I'm kind of in the ballpark, it's going to work out. I have faith that it will work out. So I said three things. It desaturates it. It makes it lighter. Oh, and it also makes it more opaque with gouache. White is the most opaque pigment that we're going to use, or that exists really. So I'm going to, the other thing I like to do is I like to continually tell myself that I am painting a study. And of course it's a baby food jar with some gouache stains in it. So of course it's a study, because who would do a finished painting of such a oddball thing, right?
I like
but
it,
that's
though.
sort of,
It's very simplistic. I'm drawn to that, but it can be a challenge. Like you said, not only trying to fill that background with something that, you know, if you don't like the color, or it's just a challenge. Plus it's translucent. So there's a lot of different things going on here. But I like the simplicity of it.
Yeah, and I found that sort of resonates with viewers, but it's at the end of the day, it has to be a thing that you enjoy painting. And I started doing a painting a day, I don't know, back in, I have fallen off, obviously. Anyone who looks at my Instagram, I don't paint every single day, but sometimes I do. But I did, painting a day was a big deal back in the, early to mid 2000s. And I decided to do it. I was painting in oil at the time, but, just find something and start painting it. And it doesn't matter if it's kind of maybe a sort of a boring or mundane kind of thing, because if it has any kind of visual interest at all, once you start painting, you will find something of interest in it, right? If you like to paint, it will become interesting. And there's a lot of sort of push and pull between the figure and the ground here. So if I sort of mess something up or go out of the lines or whatever, it doesn't really matter, right? It's gouache. It's going to dry pretty fast. And I can address any little drawing errors that happen quite easily. I might have to work on, I might have to block in more background or something while it dries, but you can take care of a lot of stuff. So I'm mixing up kind of a light gray because this, I'm going to address the shoulder of this jar here. And that gets a little bit lighter. And I'm not touching my darkest dark. I'm not putting any white in that, because once you add white to something, you can never again make it as dark as it was before you added white to it.
Right.
And with you know, if you have a vast acreage in your palette, you can you can do whatever you want. But you know, I have a relatively small thing going on here. So my darks, I'm going to kind of mix up here. Even though the yellow ochre doesn't have a dark value, it doesn't have any white in it. So I can make that dark if I want to. Whoops, I just added white to it. But it's not that much. So, and I'm keeping this fairly brushy and kind of loose. I use my finger a lot to smear out any extra water that I get on it and, you know, soften edges. But once I have something like this going on, now I just have to sort of look at what's happening here. The bottom, the glass is sort of pulling some of that lighter value up into the bottom, and I don't have a value yet, a color yet for my foreground. I'm going to take the same sort of setup and just add a little bit of yellow. I should add a little more yellow ochre, I think, and lots of white, because I do want this to be, I want this foreground to be very light, or, you know, substantially lighter than the background. So just so I can tell that there's a plane change going on there. And then when I paint into my object, the curve of the glass is sort of pulling some of that lighter color, that lighter tone up into the glass here. So I can get that in. So it's, but this is all the same sort of background color family that I have sort of, you know, I sort of made it up. But I know how the glass, I know how light affects the glass. So I'm sort of using a combination of things that I know and combining it with what I actually see. A term that I read somewhere on the internet, I would love to give credit to the artist who I got it from, but I can't remember if they are. But it's a term that's pretty common, and that's where I'm not necessarily a realist. Of course, my paintings look pretty realistic just because I'm sort of stuck on that idea.
Yeah.
But I really like the idea of being a perceptual painter, right? So the painting is based on my perceptions. I know enough about painting and how the eyes work to know that the idea of sort of objective realism is probably, you know, objective realism is maybe something that doesn't exist. Everything is colored through our own lens. And I think if you're a perceptual painter, you just sort of embrace that and say, well, this is the way I see it. And this is what these sort of visual phenomenon seem to be doing for me. And so I'm going to try and capture that. And it gives you some leeway to sort of play around a little bit more.
Yeah.
This is not as dark. So I think the thing that we're looking at is really sort of the end of the diving board, right? It's like the jumping off point for what we're trying to paint. And really, we don't, you know, our viewers aren't going to see, it's a jar, so they're not necessarily going to see the thing that you painted. No one's going to be judging you on this kind of objective accuracy, but it has to have the ring of truth, I think. for my own painting. So that's what I try to capture, sometimes more than others, but so this is starting to look like something, right?
Yeah.
It's getting a little bit, I'm starting to have a little something to, I didn't want to add white to that, but that's it. I'm going to add it anyway. I can just see the top of my jar here. So a little bit of permanent yellow and some white. That's probably too yellow. But again, guess and check, right? If it's got too much yellow, I just add a little bit of yellow ochre and just maybe get a little something on the top there. I think the jar lid is probably darker overall than what I have painted here. So I'm going to mix up that sort of same chromatic black and just add some yellow ochre into it. So I have something that's kind of goldish, it's like a dark color. It's sort of based on gold. And just sort of mess around with some of the smaller plane changes that are happening up in that lid. There's a little bit of a rim, a little bit of core shadow in there. Pretty dark right there, a little bit dark there. And I can use the corner of my flat to get smaller marks if I want to. I think this edge, this corner, that's a pretty soft edge. So why not take a chance on that and just sort of make it go away.
Oh, interesting.
The same thing. Well, yeah, that's one of the things that's really fun about doing glass or jars is that they, that is one of their properties, right? They're shiny, so they're reflective. There's highlights and hot spots on them, but they're also transparent, which means that there are places where they're gonna disappear. And I think this edge down here is another good candidate for just knocking that out. And if you can feel your brush sort of sticking to the paper, sometimes that's a good thing if you're trying to get more of a dry, brushy sort of technique. But sometimes you want to just add just a little bit of water, just enough to get the paint to sort of flow off it a little bit more. But those are all kind of the fun things about gouache that you sort of discover as you use it, just sort of its working quality.
So you said earlier that you were painting primarily in oil. Why did it's just something you decided to include, or did you switch all the way over to gouache?
I still do oil painting and I really like it. I'm working on a commission of a bunch of small paintings right now for a client that are all in oil. But I always like the look of gouache. I like the sort of matte finish that it has. It's super easy to photograph. That's why it was such a popular, I think that's one reason why it was such a popular illustration medium before photography sort of took over magazines and stuff. It dries fast and photographs easily because it has a matte finish. And if you're working on a deadline, you need to, both of those things are very helpful. Yeah. But I saw a lot of sort of golden age illustrations that were done in gouache, and it was just fascinating. And there's a lot of contemporary painters who paint in gouache, and I really liked the results. And I just started experimenting with it and looking up, online different ideas and stuff about what it was all about. And I thought, well, the best way to do it is just to kind of try it,
Yeah.
And so I've been dabbling with it for about 10 years, but for the last maybe 2 years, I've almost exclusively been working on with gouache for my personal work, just because it's so fun. And I have a short attention span, and I usually have my window of time for painting is usually pretty short. I have kids, I have a full-time job, I have a family, and I have a bunch of pets, a bunch of animals running around. So I might just have an hour to paint. And I like layering. That's a fun technique. But if you're going to layer an oil painting, you have to, wait like a week or two for it to dry.
Right. Yeah.
But gouache, you can layer pretty immediately, or, within the single session for sure. And there's ways to, when I paint with oils, I I'll finish a small painting in a session also, but it's a different kind of technique. It's a little bit different. But I like being able to build up paint surfaces and really sort of build things up sort of slowly. And layering is it's really fun. I'm kind of looking for places where the light is coming through this surface. There's some reds in here. I'll take this same batch here and just add some flame red, which you have to be super careful with because it's such an overpowering pigment that it'll sort of take over.
It really will. I've noticed that there are some pigments like that. Like you can pick up just the teeniest, tiniest little bit and it still will flood everything.
Yeah. So a lot of times I'll put a little blob on the side of my canvas and just grab some of it with my corner of my brush. And now I'm getting to the point where I'm working a little bit more opaquely.
We've got about a little less than 20 minutes left.
Okay. I need to get to the good parts here then.
You mean we haven't even gotten good parts yet?
Well, I think there's, when you finally dial in your dark accents and your highlights, that's sort of the eye candy happens and gets things to really look the way you want. This edge, I really want it to disappear more. I can still see my pencil marks. There we go. That's a little better. Maybe just make it a little bit fuzzy here. And let's see, I think we have a little bit of a, and now I'm using for highlights and these darker accents. If I do any, I am on just a little bit of yellow to that. This is almost no water in this gouache. This is like just out of the tube. And we have a little bit of light hitting that rim. And this is where a flat is such a nice tool because I can sort of pull it sideways and get a very narrow mark.
Yes, look at that pop. Love it.
And if I blow it, if I get something that's not exactly the right shape, it doesn't, I could wipe it off certainly, or like those are a little jagged on the bottom. If I wanted to be really fussy about that, I could just chop it off with a little bit of darker color and kind of a wet brush like that. So that you have lots of options on stuff to do. So my reference looks a little bit different than what I'm looking at just because I took the reference picture at a different time of day yesterday and it was sunny. So it has these sort of nice highlights coming down here. There's a nice one where the shoulder changes corner, and I'm going to use the corner of my brush to just add that. And I think this other sort of vertical highlight, I'm going to take just a little bit of my cobalt blue, because that highlight is caused by my studio door, which has a window in it. And there's just a very light sky blue streak that sort of comes down right about there. And I don't have to be, that got a little bit clunky. Add that. And so some of the paint down here at the bottom is still pretty thin. It kind of dropped down because I painted over it. And let's sort of reestablish that a little bit because that got the shape is kind of off, kind of comes up a little bit over here. Some areas where there's only one layer of sort of washy paint is okay. You don't have to cover everything with the same thickness. And certainly on this little painting, I don't think I'm going to paint all the way to the edge because, it's just a study. That's sometimes my mantra, and it keeps me, it keeps it in perspective, what I'm doing here. I'm doing something to try and learn something about what I'm painting, and also something that's going to be enjoyable to paint, because if you're painting and it's not enjoyable, I don't think you're going to improve that quickly, because who wants to go out and do something that is onerous, right? So I think it's really important to have fun, because otherwise you just wouldn't do it. And these little paintings end up becoming sort of almost like little diary entries for me. I think that the more I paint and the more I sort of revisit similar themes or even exactly the same object, and I paint it over again, I realize that the painting, and then when I look at the paintings, they have less to do with the subject and more to do with where my head was at when I painted it. And that's I don't know, that's kind of a freeing way of looking at it.
Yeah, seeing that little piece of you in there.
Yeah, that we're sort of, I don't know, documenting or exploring our visual world, but we're also we're documenting and exploring the intersection of our mentality with the world, right? Which is a little bit different than just sort of painting the things around you. I always have an inner dialogue when I paint. And when you teach, there's a thing called a task analysis, right? And that's when you break down a task into its steps, so you can share it with students, right? And I got in a habit really early on. Every time I would paint something, I think, well, what if I had a bunch of high school kids, what would I be saying to them? What am I doing? How would I explain my choices? And so I ended up having a very rich inner monologue, just sort of automatically. But I realized that these paintings have so much to do with things other than what I'm looking at.
Right.
So, I usually tell my kids to, pay attention to what you see, but also use what you know, because what your understanding is about how light describes an object in space is certainly going to be a thing that influences how you paint it. But you can't. It's tough to just do that. You also have to sort of pay attention to what's in front of you. And usually, the painting, a decent painting for me, ends up being some combination of those factors, like what am I looking at, but also what do I understand about what's happening with what I'm looking at. So I think that's getting pretty close. There's, I have lots of little mistakes and errors and stuff, and there's always a nice sort of push and pull between, like I said, between the figure and ground. You have a couple chances to get the shape right when you initially draw it in pencil, and when I initially sort of render it in paint. Those are opportunities to get it right. But I also have a second opportunity when I paint the background. I have the ability to sort of carve into my object and change its silhouette or change its shape a little bit.
Yeah.
Which is nice. So
I'm just looking at the shine on that lid again. You did such a good job with that.
Oh, thanks. Again, it's actually really, really simple. One of the reasons I like doing demos of this and indeed painting this object or objects like it is that, if you look at the palette here, I got a lot of red here, but which doesn't really occur very much in the painting, but the sort of color families that I'm using are really simple and they're really tight. It's almost kind of a, it's like a combination. It's a little bit of a value study / temperature study, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's warms and cools, and there's obviously different values. And I mixed them all mostly with primaries and sort of a modified primary palette. But it's a pretty simple value structure and, shapes to paint. So it's not as difficult, I think, as I thought this kind of thing was when I first thought, well, I'm going to paint something that's clear, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely that's definitely how I would, and how I have actually viewed it. It's scary to try to paint something that's clear. So, and values are something that I've always struggled with. So I don't know. It's just, there's so many different things, and yeah.
Yeah. Well, what did Howard Pyle, who's a great American illustrator, I think he gets credit for this quote. I think he said, value does all the work, but color gets all the credit.
Yes, I've heard that one before.
So, but really, if you get a solid value structure, you can do you can take a lot of liberties with the colors. And
Yeah, we
one of the
had
things
that. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I like thinking about it in terms of temperature and not being super tied down to mixing an exact hue. If I can get the value right, and then I can push it either warmer or cooler to sort of serve the painting, that works for me. That's fine. I'm not tied to this idea that I have to, match a color exactly. Sometimes that's nice if you can do that. It just depends on what you're painting and what you're focusing on.
Right. We had a Spanish artist earlier this week who painted some avocados, and she always uses like bright, bold, chromatic colors, very saturated in her paintings. And that was one of the questions somebody had is, how do you keep your values the same? And she's like, well, you just keep your values the same. Like, you have to have a good understanding of that value structure before you can start really experimenting with changing all of the different colors from what you're seeing to what you're not seeing.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I would agree 100% with that idea. And when I get down to the end of a painting like this, it becomes mostly a matter of, just sort of tweaking little shapes and sort of trying to get, messing with shapes and messing with edges and trying to get something that reads well by its own, on its own feet. Because like I said, people they're not going to see this reference. They're not going to be making direct one-to-one comparison.
Right.
They're going to see the painting, and the painting has to be a thing that reads right and that stands on its own.
So how do you know when you're done?
We're the only ones who can really judge when time runs out. Literally.
So you don't overwork your
like I said, I have a. Well, I think this is about done, but if if left to my own devices, I would probably mess with it for another 20 or 30 minutes, and probably to no effect, right?
Right.
It would not improve at all. But I think this is done, really. I could sort of mess with the shapes a little bit or change some values, and certainly I could expand my background all the way out to the edge of my sheet of paper. But sometimes I leave them like this.
I think it's kind of fun.
Yeah, and that's another nice reason to tone your paper, because if this were just white here, I don't think it would have the same kind of effect. But I like that you can see some pencil marks. I like that you have this nice warm yellow ochre ground, and it has a really nice feel as a study, and something that if someone wanted to, that you could throw it in a frame and hang it on a wall, and it looks like a sketchbook page. And that's one of the things that I always loved about painting and looking at other paintings. Like, I think Constable's cloud studies are more fun to look at than his finished paintings.
Interesting.
Well, I always like looking at it.
I kind of agree with it.
What's that?
Is that I kind of agree with it.
Yeah, because sketchbooks and the things that artists do for themselves are always really interesting to me, because you can see what their area of focus is. You can see what they're trying to figure out, and in a lot of ways, they have more life than a finished piece does. And I suppose the challenge is to expand that into a larger, more developed piece and keep that sort of liveliness. But I like something that looks very immediate and sort of off the cuff and looks right, but doesn't have a lot of, really fussy sort of detail. It has allusions to detail, right?
Yeah. Very cool.
I could put, there's like some chunks of paint in here that I could sort of add, but I have to be careful, because, if you get something that's the wrong shape, it can really mess something up. But sometimes it's fun to add little sort of detail-y stuff like this.
We're going to drop Craig's website and his Instagram in the chat. Be sure to check those out. He's got lots of great content. He's got some courses on gouache. You'll definitely want to check those out. Craig, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been such a wonderful demonstration.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real enjoyable experience.
Yeah, this is great. And for everyone watching today, we've got a free gift for you. 7 reasons gouache might be your new favorite medium. You can get that by going to gouachelive.com/7reasons. And you can also learn to paint gouache and learn more about it at our one-day coming up in February, Gouache Live Boot Camp on February 19th. This is a one-day beginner-friendly boot camp that makes gouache easy, fun, and it's going to help you build your confidence. We're going to talk more about the fundamentals of working with the medium, as Craig talked about today. Those value shifts can be tough, sometimes using too much water, not enough water, just going over all of those basic things. It's going to be really fun, so I encourage you to check it out. That's coming up again February 19th. Don't forget, everyone, to subscribe to our channel. We've got Art School Live here every weekday at noon Eastern Time on YouTube. Click that subscribe button so you get notified when we go live with great content like today. And also follow Eric Rhodes on Instagram. Thank you guys all so much for a super fun week. I had such a pleasure getting to host everyone this week. It has just been such a joyful week for me. So thank you guys, and until next time.